Welcome to another episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Spelman, and I'm joined here with my lovely co-host and colleague, Justin Brackenrich. Justin, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Ryan. How about yourself?
Justin, I'm living the dream.
Good.
Now, we're in the middle of the season, I guess. Maybe not quite the middle,
So it
but
feels like the middle, but for some of us, it's just the beginning. Is that right? We're just kind of wrapping up planting and kind of starting post spraying and some of this stuff. So, like, some crops are well in the middle and some are just starting their lives.
yeah, that's right. This episode is titled Mid-Season Check-In. But really, I have farmers that just wrapped up their corn planting. If you're in Pennsylvania, you know just how wet it's been this spring season, this spring into early summer season. It's been really hard to get a lot of crops on the ground. So you're right. I mean, we have if we're just taking corn for example, we have corn in my area that's about thigh high, but we also have corn that just got planted in the last week, and so it's kind of an interesting time of year. So it'll be interesting to get some perspectives from some folks on what's going on, and that's kind of the goal today. Is we have a few little, I guess, mini segments that we're bringing on folks to talk about their different crop systems and their different observations. So, Justin, why don't you talk a little bit maybe about some of those topics we have on doc?
Today we have kind of a mixed bag episode, and we're going to start with Dr. Heidi Reed and her wheat tour. And so the wheat tour, they get together, they go out, they scout wheat with some millers, some purchasers, some other extension folks, and what they're basically doing is looking for populations and disease, anything that could kind of give them a gauge of what the wheat crop is going to look like. So she's going to join us and kind of debrief what they found and what producers can do to clean up some of those issues in 25 as they combine, and then maybe kind of avoid some of them in 26. Then we're going to talk with Dr. Alyssa Collins about tar spot. And, we've talked a lot about tar spot, and if you've been to any ag meetings, you've probably heard a lot about it. But what we want to talk about today is when should we start scouting? What can we do about it? Has this year's weather changed anything? New recommendations, etc., kind of specific to where we are at this current moment. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to meet with educator Andrew Frankenfield to discuss the Pennsylvania 5-acre corn and soybean contest. And so these contests are kind of run by the Pennsylvania Corn Board or the Soybean Board with some involvement by extension here and there. Other sources kind of come in as harvest supervisors, and what we do is we're taking these blocks, we're combining specific areas, and we're using them to compare how productive something is with a certain set of inputs. And so Andrew's going to talk to us about how we do that, how we sign up, what the producer gets out of it, and what these boards get out of it, and how we can use this data. So it's going to be a really kind of nice, fun, short 10, 15, 20-minute clips from each one of them. And hopefully this gets us a lot of good ideas and a lot of good things that we can think about over the course of the summer.
Yeah, that's great, Justin. I think we have a good mix of cropping systems to talk about today. And I think that the wheat tour is a great place to start. So,
Yeah, let's
um,
get going.
yeah,
Heidi?
let's get going. Let's get into it. So we have on, as Justin mentioned, Dr. Heidi Reed. I think we can call her at this point a friend of the show. We probably called her a friend of the show on the last one. So, she's going to come and join us to talk about that.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Heidi Reed. I'm the agronomy educator for Penn State Extension based in York County, which is in the southeastern part of the state. I've been involved with the wheat tour now for several years. It's an effort amongst several universities, private crop consultants, and grain millers and brokers in the Mid-Atlantic, where we go out, take a look at the wheat crop about a month prior to harvest and try to assess the yield and quality of the upcoming crop so the millers and grain brokers know what to expect for the crops coming in.
So Heidi, tell us, how long has this program been going? Who started it? Where did you inherit it from? What's the idea behind getting them all together? I know you mentioned that it's to see what they're going to be getting, but when they come out with you, at that point, it's just, can they change how they use that wheat then from what they're seeing, or is it just giving them an idea of like, this isn't going to be a great year for wheat?
Yeah, sure. So I actually don't know the extensive history of this program. I've been involved for at least 6 years. And prior to myself, I know Greg Roth was extensively involved, our previous grain specialist, and now Daniela Carrijo is taking a bigger role. But we did not have a grain specialist for several years, so I stepped in to kind of fill the void there and lead the effort in Pennsylvania wheat growing regions. But what it helps the grain buyers and millers with is having an idea of, are they going to have to source wheat from elsewhere to meet their quotas? They can start looking around for other folks to buy from, getting shipping lined up when it's coming across the country, for example, from plain states. That's something that can't just happen on a dime. They've got to start pulling strings well ahead of time. And they can also start, thinking about building their discount schedules, maybe seeing how they can arrange grain in the bins, because for some, like feed quality grain, for example, you can take a certain level of reduced quality. You can have a certain amount of vomitoxin that you can dilute if you mix it correctly. So they can start planning how to handle that kind of thing if they know they're going to be getting a bunch of junky wheat coming in.
So I know in the crop tour, you guys do take some like hard qualitative data at least because you put out a report to talk about the crop condition and what you're observing in the field. So could you maybe talk about maybe what are you sampling for? What protocols you guys follow as you're doing this tour? And then we can go into some of the results that you saw this year from the crop tour.
Sure. So the protocol is pretty simple and replicable at home if you would like to do this on your own farm. So we go out with a yardstick, count the number of harvestable tillers in that space, and then calculate the average heads per foot of wheat. Then we take a random sample from that 3 feet of wheat that we counted. We pull 5 heads, and then we count out the number of spikelets per head. And the spikelet is that little cluster of several kernels that alternates on either side of the stem, like a zipper. If you hold it sideways, you can easily count it. And that usually ranges between like 12 and 18 spikelets per head. And then we count the number of kernels per spikelet. And those are all multipliers in this yield calculation. We account for row spacing. So we have our plant or our harvestable tillers. We have our spikelets per head. We have our kernels per spikelet. And then the rest is a little bit of magic math that we do. And it's a pretty good estimate of yield at the time that it's taken, but we always do caution people that, with a month or 6 weeks between when we take the tour and harvest, a lot can change in that time. One thing that we don't account for in that calculation is the density of each kernel. There's no way we can do that in the field, and that plays a big role in yield at the end of the day. So just a word of caution.
Now that you kind of went over some of your testing protocols, why don't you share with us what you guys found this year? How is wheat quality looking, and what do you, and maybe anything you did say that there are some changes that happen. We are a few weeks out, right? So is there anything that you've noticed that has changed since?
Yeah, so our yield estimates were actually quite close to average. So we cluster a couple counties together that have more similar, growing conditions. So York, Adams, Cumberland, Franklin County, we had yields ranging in the fields that we did tour between about 80 and 150 bushels per acre. So depending on the level of management and amount of inputs that farmers were pumping into these wheat fields. But that leaves the average, around 100, 110 bushels per acre if we remove the outlier 150 bushel acre field, which is close to the average that we've observed over the last several years. And then in a little further east, Lancaster, Lebanon, Berks counties, we had similar approximately 100 bushels per acre average yield, and that is dead on average that we've seen. In terms of quality, when we went out, we were really concerned as we were doing the tour that we would see lots of head scab, fusarium head blight, which we're concerned about. The millers are concerned about primarily because of the toxins that it can produce. It makes it not as good of a feed source, as well as reduces the quality and can kick it out of food quality wheat for flour. So that's the big disease that we look for. We were concerned when we went out that it would be bad because we had perfect conditions for it to proliferate this spring. It was wet for extended periods around flowering time. So we were pleasantly surprised when we went out in early June and did not see hardly any head scab. At that time, we attributed it to, everyone's on their fungicide sprays early, and especially right around flowering. We're like, great, these guys nailed their sprays. They protected their wheat. We didn't have scab. Fast forward a month, a couple days ago, went out, and it's a different story from what we saw in early June. So we think we just toured a little bit too early and the scab had not had time to develop. But now looking out there, it's looking pretty severe in some cases, especially if timing of that fungicide application was not correct right at flowering, or if people skipped the fungicide altogether to try to save some money. So, you may want to just brace yourself for potentially having a load rejected, especially if you didn't have a timely spray. We've also seen, now with continued rain, sooty mold. Just if you look out and you see just a black barley field or wheat field, that is just sooty mold that is kind of grown and taken over. And, all of these things impact quality, specifically for flour grade, for food grade, but, they can also impact feed grade, especially the vomit toxins that are associated with scab. So I guess what can you do now before harvest? There's nothing you can do in terms of spraying at this point. That ship has sailed. However, when you're running the combine through the field, turning up the fan speed to try to kick out some of those shriveled light test weight kernels can be the difference between having a load below the threshold or above the threshold. So I'd recommend really, trying to dial that in. You have to balance between your yield that you're getting and the quality, and that's for each farmer to decide.
So as you're listening to this, the East and where Heidi's talking about, wheat is probably well underway in harvest. Barley is going, wheat will probably be going. If you're on the Western side, you may have, more opportunity to make some of these adjustments while you're taking them off. But, again, what I would kind of encourage is going back. We're going to include these, the report from the wheat quality tour within the show links. Go back and look and see, where your yields stacked up as you took yours off. Kind of look at some of your quality options that you saw in your field as you were combining, or as you are combining. Maybe you're sitting in your combine today listening to this. Take some of that information, compare it to what we're seeing, and that lets us know. I mean, and shoot us an email, right? Shoot Heidi or Justin or Ryan an email and tell us, hey, I'm in this area. I was significantly higher or significantly lower, right on the money. Any kind of information you provide us helps us get a better handle on what things are looking like, and can help us kind of expand this and make a better program to predict where we may be moving into the future.
Yeah, and if I could just add, if you don't stack up against the 150 bushels per acre, that's nothing to feel bad about. That was a kind of an experimental field where that individual was just throwing the kitchen sink at this wheat, and he understands that that's not going to be a profitable field for him. Whereas the 80 bushel per acre field was bin run, minimal input, and probably going to be quite profitable. So that it's all perspective and comes back down to profitability in the end.
Okay, well, Heidi, we thank you for joining us this morning to talk about the wheat tour. If anyone has ideas or thoughts of things that should be added or wants to be involved with this, we're going to include this article within the show notes. You can find Heidi's contact at the bottom of it. Please reach out, let her know what your thoughts may be on this, because most of this is happening in the southeastern, southeast, south central-ish part of the state. If you're in a different area and you'd like to be included or like to have someone come out in 2026, let us know and we'd be happy to make arrangements. So kind of a good segue. We're going to jump to Dr. Alyssa Collins, and she's also going to go into some of this disease stuff and to Steele Ryan's world, the fungal fanatics. I'm going to try and incorporate that into my daily vocabulary. I'm not sure I'll get too many opportunities to use it, but I do like it. And so Alyssa's been with us a lot, but we're gonna let Alyssa introduce herself, and then she's just gonna kind of introduce this topic of tar spot, which we've talked about a lot. I'm sure if you've been to any kind of meetings related to agriculture, you've heard it. But we're going to let her do like a 30,000 foot overview of tar spot, and then we're going to jump into what we can do to help manage it.
Yeah, so hi, thanks for having me. I'm Alyssa Collins, and I run Penn State's research farm in Lancaster County, which is the Southeast Agricultural Research and Extension Center. And I'm also a plant pathologist focused on field crop diseases. So tar spot is a disease that's relatively new in the scheme of corn diseases in the state of Pennsylvania. And it showed up in the United States in 2016, thereabouts. It showed up in Pennsylvania for the first time in 2020. And since then, we've had it every year, and things have changed a little bit every year regarding how it shows up and how bad it gets. So this is a fungal disease. It's a disease of the leaves, and it's one that's kind of easy to identify once you've seen it, because nothing else really causes the kind of symptoms it does, which are these really deep black spots that are on the leaves. You can't scrape them off, and they go through to both sides of the leaf. So that's the first clue. And then over time, if the disease gets worse, it can result in death of that plant tissue. And so you get like dry, crackly leaves that are looking like they're dying. And that's because they are. So that's the main issue with tar spot, is that it takes away a lot of our photosynthetic area of that leaf. That's the part of the plant that does the job of converting sunlight into sugars that you need to fill your grain. And so that's what we're concerned about, losing that opportunity to make really good grain and also to have the leaf tissue that we need for those guys who are trying to chop silage.
Yeah, so you mentioned that it started becoming a problem in 2016. Maybe we started seeing it in Ohio and the Midwestern states, and then we've gotten towards 2020 where we've really seen it start to creep into Pennsylvania. And since then, we've kind of been keeping track of what counties they're in. And, like any disease, every year it gets a little bit worse. So would you say at this point, are we at a phase where it's kind of endemic to our area now? And are we still, is it still, it was common knowledge before that a lot of our spores were coming in from the Midwest. Is that still the case, or are we getting local sporulation, and are we starting to think about it a little differently?
Yeah, so we think that first introduction in 2020 was probably plant material that was moved from the Midwest. But since then, the tar spot fungus really is very happy in Pennsylvania, and there's almost no doubt that it is overwintering here because of the widespread nature of it and how it shows up across Pennsylvania every single year now. It can overwinter in Wisconsin, and so if it can do that, it's very likely that it has no problem doing it in Pennsylvania. So we're fairly certain that it is not blowing in from anywhere else. We just have it because this is a fungus that persists in crop residue, We have a lot of crop residue in Pennsylvania because we do a lot of no-till, we do a lot of corn. We have a really diverse landscape in terms of what we're growing out there. So we're probably always going to be dealing with this issue from here on out, ever since we first got it.
Kind of to piggyback off of that, we used to have a link or a site that we were tracking where we see new outbreaks of this and we could confirm them in different counties. Um, are we still doing that, or to that point, are we just kind of saying like, hey, it's everywhere now. We kind of just recognize that we've got it and we just need to be more proactive in management.
Yeah, it's still actually pretty helpful for us as the extension pathologist to find out where it shows up when. Because we actually are still creating a map of tar spot across the country, and that helps us learn more about its epidemiology, like what kind of winters favor it or don't favor it, and what kind of conditions we can expect to see it show up in. So that is still helpful to at least learn about the first sighting in every county in Pennsylvania. And the way we do that often now is just asking people to share with their extension educator, who will then share with us, or sending that info right to us directly. So me and my colleague Paul Easker, who is a legitimate plant disease epidemiologist, this is actually his whole job. And so he's really good at using this information to determine then how we can manage the disease and how we can expect the disease to show up in the future. So yes, we're probably going to see it every year because it's everywhere now, but when we see it can actually tell us more about how we manage it.
Let's get into maybe management then. So we're entering a part of the season where, we have corn that's actively growing, in its vegetative stages. At what point should we really start thinking about scouting for tar spot? Now, especially now that we have residue that's carrying it, has that changed?
Yeah, so it has changed a little bit, I think. And the best time to start scouting for it is yesterday. And I say that because as we record this on June 27th, we actually had our first report in Pennsylvania in Chester County yesterday on the 26th. And this is earlier than we've ever seen it show up in Pennsylvania before. Last year, I think it showed up first on July 9th. So that's a really big difference. And that was like 10 days earlier than the previous year. So it's here, and the weather conditions are really going to dictate when it shows up. So we used to say, hey, if you're scouting by the 4th of July, you're probably going to find it when it shows up. But now we're seeing that maybe that's not quite early enough. And that kind of tracks along with our weather this year. So as you know, we've all just experienced these couple of weeks that have just been persistent rain, cool temperatures, and that is really hospitable to this fungus. So that's what this fungus likes, to make it grow and sporulate and then fly around and infect corn. So it's not too surprising, I would say. And it's now we just know that we have to be on our toes a little bit earlier. Now, that being said, do we have to do something about it right now immediately? That's a different story. But scouting is the first part of management. So knowing if you have it and then being able to go back out into that field and monitor its progress is huge. The thing about tar spot is that we really want to do something about it by the time it reaches about 5% coverage on that ear leaf. In a lot of cases, we don't have ear leaves yet. So this season has been really variable in terms of when people were able to get into the field to plant. One farmer has stuff that's V7, V8, V9 right now. Right next to it, he's got stuff that is maybe V2. And that is not at all uncommon this year, where people had a really wide planting range. So I mention this because we want to, I'm going to mix a lot of metaphors here, but trying not to jump the gun when we're talking about a fungicide is an important concept. The reason is that fungicides can't last an entire season. Our best fungicides probably last about 3 weeks in the tissue. And so it's important to kind of keep our powder dry and hold on to those tools until they can be really effective. Because hunters don't shoot when their target is out of range, right? And it's actually out of range to be spraying something that's V2, V5, because your ear leaf is not even, it doesn't even exist yet. And that's the one that we're really working on protecting, because that fills, and everything above that fills that grain. So if we spray now, it's not going to really last for us later. So really, we're monitoring the progress of it. If it does start to approach like really high levels of tar spot, that might change the calculus there a little bit, and we might just have to put some sort of suppressive spray on it. But I would mention that there's another tool where we can kind of track our risk. So maybe we could include this in the show notes, but there's a risk tool that exists now that kind of is new for this year, held at the Crop Protection Network. And so if we can share that, you'll be able to put in your coordinates there, your address, wherever you're at, and you can tell it to go fetch your weather, and it'll use that weather information over the past period of time to say how high your risk is for tar spot, for gray leaf, the other one that we worry about with corn, and a number of other diseases on corn and soybeans. So that could be really helpful to sort of say, oh, hey, we're about to go into a period where it doesn't look like we're at big risk. So I'm going to reserve my spray for a little later and keep an eye on both the field and my weather conditions. And that can really help us a lot more with those fungicide decisions, because they're hard. It's a really hard decision on when to do a spray if you're going to do one.
So I do have the link for that in the show notes. The other thing I've added to this, and I'll look back while we talk here and find the episode, but I know we spent a lot of time with you and Paul talking about diseases and the updated efficacy tables and stuff. But I've also added that link back to these new updated efficacy tables, because it's important that if you are thinking about this spray, we're getting a spray that actually works for tar spot, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and the nice thing is, we can probably get a spray that works for tar spot and time it properly so that it gives us control of gray leaf spot too. And that's really nice. You get two for your money there, because gray leaf spot traditionally still is our most yield impacting corn disease, more so than tar spot. Tar spot can go to extremes and be really upsetting when it gets bad, but it rarely gets very bad in all fields every year. So that would be something I would recommend to consider as well. The other thing is, we've already, by virtue of planting at widely different times this year, kind of spread our risk. So probably not all of our corn is going to be at that high risk growth stage when we also have high risk conditions for this disease. So that's actually good. And in a normal year, we might not have that situation, but a farmer could choose to have that situation by spreading out their planting dates, choosing different maturities, things like that. There's another tool we might put in the show notes if you guys want, and that would be to give people the link to what is actually a little thing to train your eye on what is 5% leaf coverage of these diseases. So Crop Protection Network also has a little tool that you can go, and it shows you different pictures, and it will ask you what percentage is this leaf area coverage, and you click through and you do that a couple of times to kind of train your eye on that, because it's actually pretty hard for humans to do that themselves. But once you get tuned in, it becomes a lot easier and will help you. You'd be surprised at how bad 5% actually looks on a leaf. I know I am every time.
Yeah, it's definitely. I know when I'm doing scouting, I will sometimes even print out some of those tools, those 5%, 10%, so because as you're scouting, your eye might change too, and you might
Yeah.
see things differently. So having those resources, the Crop Protection Network is great training your eye on that. So I think we can kind of wrap up here, but I just wanted to get one get just like a little bit more specific on the timing, just because I think it's an important note. So would you say like the optimal window for protection, as we know of right now, is like that early phase, so like maybe V10 to like your reproductive stage, your first reproductive stage, like tasseling, maybe a little bit after? Like, is there a range that we're targeting at this point?
Yeah, if you're really going for both of those diseases, first of all, scouting to see if they're present in your field at all is important because the longer you can wait, the better probably, because we have found pretty good efficacy from like VT, so right around tasseling, all the way through actually R3 for this particular disease, for tar spot. For gray leaf spot, it's a little bit earlier. So that's kind of a wide window, but getting in there somewhere is going to be much better than going too early, I would say. A lot of folks are interested in doing a spray at like a V5 timing up to V7, and that really doesn't give us very much efficacy in a typical year. The vast majority of times that we've tried it, it does not give us an economic benefit. And it also doesn't last through to when you're tasseling and then grain filling. So it's a decision that, people might do because it's much easier to get over the corn at that point, and I totally get that. But unfortunately, most of our corn sprays are most effective when that corn's already pretty tall.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that the mechanical limitations can be tough sometimes, but if you have a way to get it, I think those higher sprays are really important. So maybe this is where drones come in, right? So that's just a little teaser,
Yeah.
okay? So well, thank you, Alyssa, for coming on. We really appreciate it. I think this is a really timely time to start thinking about these corn leaf diseases and particularly tar spot. So thanks for coming on, Alyssa. We appreciate it. So next we have on Andrew Frankenfield. Andrew Frankenfield is a member of our team as well, and he's going to join us to talk a little bit about the 5 Acre Corn Club contest and the Pennsylvania soybean yield contest. So, Andrew, why don't you introduce these two programs and give us a little bit of background on the programs and your little advertisement for them as well.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Well, it's good to be here this morning. I sit as an ex officio member on the Pennsylvania Corn Growers Association and help with the corn contest somewhat. And also on the soybean contest for Pennsylvania, I summarize that report. So with the Pennsylvania Corn Growers Association, they have their own corn contest. The 5 Acre Corn Club has a long history. I don't know how many decades, but it's gone back quite some time. That is different than the National Corn Growers Association yield contest. So you have to apply for the Pennsylvania contest by the middle of August. The 14th is generally the deadline. There's a form to fill out and mail back to Martin Crone, who summarizes the report. And then this Pennsylvania soybean contest is that can be entered until early September. We ask people to enter their farm. We don't have to specify the field, just that they're going to have an entry by September 1. It gives us time to plan and get our educators and our supervisors out there to know what they're going to have to deal with come September and October. That can get to be a busy time to verify those harvests.
So one of the things that I think we should kind of dive into a little bit and is this explanation of 5 Acre corn or soybean club, right? And I hear a lot of people, I'm in the West, I hear a lot of people make this statement of like, well, I don't have that many fields that are 5 acres, especially after I take the outsides off and, the deer damage and stuff. What does that mean? What are we taking off? What does the kind of procedure look like when you say we're doing a harvest or something to be involved in this contest?
Sure. Don't let field size deter you from doing this. If you're a farm that uses strips and you have multiple strips that add up to 5 acres, that's acceptable. But generally, we're not just taking a little piece of the field. We're removing the end rows, the around the outside of the field, the headlands, and then we're we're harvesting one full pass the whole length of the field. We're skipping at least one pass or two, and then coming back and going until we reach 1.25 acres. An acre and a quarter is what we actually harvest out of that field, both for corn and soybeans. So we're wheeling behind the combine and using the width of their header as that measuring tool. So yeah, you don't have to have a one contiguous 5 acre field if that's a issue for a grower, but generally that is often the case.
And
Sometimes the fields are so big it's one pass
yeah.
in some cases.
And just to like drive this home, right? It is as technical as it sounds, right? That Andrew is out there with a clipboard measuring the width of what you're taking off. He's got a wheel and he's walking behind you. And so, when he gets to the end of the row, he multiplies, 25 feet for whatever your header width is, times the 800 feet that he went, and that gives him a square footage of the first pass. And you continue to make these passes until you've reached that 1.25 acre minimum, right? And that's the way that all of these things are kept uniform at that 1.25. And so there is some standardization that has to happen to this. We can't use combine measurements or anything like that to do this. We do have to have the inspector out there, right? I can
Yes.
speak from experience. I've walked behind quite a few of these combines doing these covered in bean dust and seeing corn cobs fly around. So if you're in extension very long, you do get the pleasure of doing some of these contests.
Yeah, and the sometimes it's hot, it's always dusty, and sometimes there's two or three in a day you're trying to do as a harvest supervisor. One point of clarification: once you get to an acre and a quarter, you do need to continue that pass to the end of the field, so you can't just stop and back out. So farmers usually scout their fields and kind of know where the better parts of the fields are, but they do have to take a full combine width the whole length of the field. They obviously in beans they'll try and skip the areas that has sprayer tracks in it, that sort of thing. And some growers take it extremely seriously, and other guys are like, I just want to have data for myself, so I know where I stand. So it works good to do it today. It's a field that I think is doing well, but other guys kind of have this planned out for the whole year.
Yeah, so maybe that's probably a good segue to talk about as a farmer from the perspective. What's the value of being involved in these contests? What do you get out of it? And how is it useful to your operation?
I think everybody has a little different spin on it, but I think overall it's a way that they can verify the yields that they're getting. They can compare inputs that they've been using, things that they've been trying to improve yield. They can track yield over a course of years or decades. We had some folks that have been doing this for 20, 30 years. They're winning yields back in the 80s were 100 and some bushel corn, and now it's over 300, right? So it's pretty amazing to see the changes in the yield potential and the yields achieved. So, and others, it's just bragging rights. Hey, I won the region. So it's not just that you're competing against everybody in the whole state. We have regions of Pennsylvania. There's 5 of them. So you can win your region, and you may also win the state. In this soybean contest, the winner of the region gets a free trip for one person to the Commodity Classic that following winter, and the winner of the state gets a trip for 2. So that's a nice added bonus. But generally, folks typically will sign up every year. We have very many guys that just they sign up and do this year in and year out, and like to see that data. We're also verifying the yield. There's tons of technology in the combines today, but is it always calibrated correctly, right? So this is another way to verify what we measure is what they're measuring on their combine, and sort of another calibration tool.
So if there's a benefit for the producer, what is the benefit to the corn growers or the soybean board for having this data, or extension, or who catalogs it?
Yeah, sometimes we get people saying, "Well, that's a lot of questions you ask." As we go through our harvest report, we're looking at how many beans are left on the ground, what is the population of that field, um, what management practices did they do? Did they soil test? What's their pH? What's their fertility? Fungicide, insecticide applications. The list kind of goes on and on. And then we can bring all that information back to the yield that they achieved and have some really nice summary pages at the end of the year. As far as folks, if they no-tilled, what's their average yield? If they used a corn planter versus a drill, their row spacing, planting date. We have folks planting in early April. We have folks generally planting in May. There are very few, if any, entries planted in June anymore. And right down to, like I said, fungicide, insecticide, um, and seed treatments, inoculation, um, foliar fertilizer, what herbicide programs they're using. So there's a lot of stuff that we can look at and see the trends in the industry. One example is 100% of the people in the soybean contest last year used glyphosate, and 85% used a pre-emergent herbicide. That's one thing we really push, right? Is put the pre-herbicides down. 97% used multiple modes of action. That's what we preach all winter long at the winter meetings, right? And then talking about post sprays and that sort of thing. So, and then what were the yield limiting factors? Every year is different, right? Last year we had an extremely dry fall, but there was a wet period there that affected some grain quality. So the information is there's a lot there, and that's one thing I do on that soybean report is to put it all together and make a nice report. The other thing is we do a summary of the regional winners practices. So other farmers can look at what the regional winner did and say, oh, well, they rotate after corn. That's a general trend, and the row spacing is this, and their planting dates are this. So they have a chance to sort of look at practices some of these top yield achievers are doing, and maybe try a few things of that on their own farm.
I think it's valuable for us. I mean, we love that information for the nerdy crop people out here that are probably listening to this podcast. You're all kind of nerds in your own way. There's some cool information that we can glean out of these contests. So the more people that are involved, the better that information is. So if I'm a farmer and I want to be a part of these contests, what other than signing up, filling out the paperwork, and you mentioned those deadlines to get that paperwork in at the beginning of the episode. What else do we need, right? We need someone to observe the contest. So do you have any tips for that of finding someone to help you out?
Sure. So just the first step is to find the login form, right, or the sign-in form. So pasoybean.org is the website to go to for that. There's actually an online sign up right there. And then on the corn side, in our Penn State Extension website, we'll have an article that'll link to that. You can look up PA corn contest or 5-acre corn contest. But as far as the farmer, the legwork they need to do, we provide a list of harvest supervisors. It doesn't have to be a Penn State Extension educator. It can be a crop consultant. It can be, we have some people from Conservation District, NRCS, even FSA. They cannot have an interest in the crop, right? So we want to make sure it's a non-biased individual. But generally, folks reach out to their local agronomy educator. And so if you're new to this, find out who that person is and reach out to them in September, a couple weeks before harvest. Make sure you get their cell phone number and keep them in the loop, right? We often we get these narrow windows to harvest, and if Ryan and Justin and myself who do these harvests kind of know what the contestant is thinking, if the weather holds, next Tuesday we're looking to get into that cornfield or something. That's really helpful because we often get pulled in multiple directions.
And I'll admit, speaking from experience, I kind of know the folks that do this because, as Andrew mentioned, you don't see a ton of turnover. Once people get in it, they kind of continue to do it. And I've done it for these people for years. And when we start getting closer to that, I start asking them, hey, when do you think this is going to happen? If I haven't heard from, right? Because you get these texts at 9 or 10 o'clock when you're going to bed, and then you wake up and you found this thing at 6 in the morning. So it's good to have that relationship with whoever you're having come out and do this, so that you can communicate, and I think that's really important because we're all, as the farmer, it takes a little bit of your time, but it's worth the time. But we don't want to spend any more time having to slow down production than what we need to.
Yeah. And sometimes a challenge is having a certified scale nearby, right? So depending where you're at, you might need to go to the quarry. The quarry might be 10 or 15 or 20 miles away, or maybe around the corner, but it might close at 3 o'clock, right? And when you're doing soybeans, you're usually just getting rolling by that time, right? So, and you got to have an empty weight on that truck and then a heavy weight on that truck. So, you might often need to have two trucks or wagons or whatever you're putting those beans on, so you can take the outside rounds off, unload the combine onto that trailer, and then put that on your contest field piece in that other trailer. So some logistics to work through, which Justin kind of hinted at. It does take a little bit extra time, but once we get rolling on it and we do it a few times, it can go pretty smoothly.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of wrapping up to a close on the corn contest. The last thing I would say before we see what Andrew says is one of the things that kind of comes up as a trend is people want to do this when there's really good years. But I see my participants in numbers come down when they're really bad years. But I think from a producer and as an institution, we can all learn things from bad years. So even if you've got really droughty beans or droughty corn, or this year where things might be a little bit spotty compared to others, I don't think that it's a time that you should dismiss the contest if you've done it for a bunch of years in a row. I think you should continue to do it. We're still happy to come out and take your corn off or your beans off or whatever that is for that information. Because remember, you're doing this on a region. Everyone in your region is probably dealing with the same challenges you are.
Yep. Excellent point, Justin. Thanks for bringing that up because um, we all have the similar weather. It always seems like the neighbor gets a little more or less rain depending on if you want to rain or not. But hey, you may have a better chance of winning in a down year when some folks that maybe have the best soil didn't quite have the rain they needed. But that information that you're receiving uh, back from this, I think, is helpful. So we encourage people to do it all the time. Probably the biggest challenge is the harvest windows. If we get into a really difficult time to harvest, um, I understand, it does take time. But people that do it year in and year out generally are pretty well committed to it, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, great, Andrew. Well, I think I would love to see more people participate. So please, if you're interested, go click on those links. We'll link the contests in the description of this episode. Check them out. Yeah, Andrew,
One
have
other
thank you.
thing, so there is no fee for the Pennsylvania soybean contest, right? So there's no charge. The Pennsylvania corn contest is a $40 fee. And you can lean on your seed supplier a little bit and maybe get them to cover that for you. But so there's really no cost. You can sign up on the soybean side and it doesn't cost you anything.
That's a great point. It's well worth it if you have the interest and you want some good data from your own field. So thanks again, Andrew, for coming on. And we will wrap it up here. So thank you to our listeners for making it through to the end of the episode here. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Agronomy Highlights podcast.